Alright, so I had just about finished this update when I got hit with that corrupted save. So I didn't, and because I was kind of like seat of my pants doing it, I did that video like right after my stuff got deleted, and I was just kind of like, ugh. I was like, now this is going to take a while. I better say something, you know, so people know I'm not just blowing them off. Or God forbid, I don't want anyone to think that like my game's abandoned or something like that, because that's not the case at all. I've actually been doing a lot of work on it's like I would call it a like an art update. Maybe it's a major update though, but there's like everything, like UI, art, combat stuff. Or well, also I found a bug that I think was kind of like the bug. It had to do with a missing file, and then the game would try to ignore the error, but something about it would basically cut, like normally the error ignore would be fine, but this particular one, because it kept trying to call it, it would get stuck in a loop, and the player wouldn't really notice, except that the longer you play while that thing's looping looking for the file, like the more your game gets kind of rickety, and then eventually you'll get like a soft lock or something like that, or hard lock, like you'll, you know, like a black screen when you try to like transfer maps or something like that. Eventually it's just like too much for it. But I got that one out. And so I guess, you know, losing the skills database isn't that big of a deal. Like, I'm going to have to make sure everything's kind of ironed out. It's just that I have, like, so for example, one of the things I switched up on was
be in the shadows.
Match Tech, which is old stuff. And so things are kind of like referring to other things now, and also the equipment's been changed up a bit. So like Magitech's been kind of split into the devices and equipment, and now you do something like Earth. Also, so I'm sure you can tell now. So I did a lot of work on art stuff. Like that one's not pixelated. Like there's a lot of different stuff I did, like to try to solidify the character design and move things away from kind of like not only the classic art style, but like the some of the stuff was like there was like RTP stuff in there from, you know, like default asset stuff, and so I needed to bring things away.
Spirit, give me strength.
So one of the things I did was I went through and I did all the monsters, redid all the monsters. So still a couple little things to flesh out, like how the archer there is slightly lighter than the other guys. But after I did a lot of work with the artwork. And at one point I realized that I was going a little overboard, and everything was like really like clean and, you know, like anime resolution. But I realized, you know, I had to remind myself, I was like, well, you know, hang on, I wanted a more like 1990s Super Nintendo kind of feel. And so what I wound up doing is kind of downgrading some of the graphics and stuff, right? Get a more of like a pixelated look. And so what you'll notice, beyond the artwork, I upgraded the combat a lot too. So I'm going to try and kind of demonstrate real quick here. This thing doesn't beat me up. I don't have any of my skills. That's right, my skill database. But everything else still works. You know, the states and equipment should be fine. Yeah. But, dang, man. So I had signature moves for everybody and stuff I gotta redo. Damn, man. Wind Slash probably doesn't affect the weather anymore. Supposed to. Those still work? No. Ugh. I don't have dance anymore either. Hey man. I have the dances. Let's do alright, so like I was saying, the push it over. Nope. That didn't save. We're gonna have to redo that. Oh, man. Her dance doesn't even work now. God. She's missing her skills now, too. God. It's such a... I mean, I can fix it. It's not a big deal, but it's kind of a big deal. That's such a kick in the pants. Ow. Stop hurting me. Another thing I did too was I went through and like eventually I'd like to replace the tile set completely. Like get like custom tile sets for everything. But for now, what I did was I took all of the mix match tile sets and stuff I had, and I went through a lot of like noise addition and reduction and pixelation and stuff to kind of try and like pixelate them closer together so that they don't clash out so much. There's where we updated some of the maps. I gotta redo steel too. Oh man. I can't even really show the stuff because I gotta fix the skills first. Dang. It's always a good way to kind of test the face graphics here. A couple of things I still got to do too, like some of the, because of how I had to do the images, so they've got like this white outline on some of them, but that's easily taken care of. I've got a thing that can like inline stuff so they won't look like kind of like white and grainy on the edges. Got a couple issues like that right there where I've got to like kind of fix how it zooms in on the face graphic. So part of the time that was spent doing this also was dedicated to a little more learning, a little more self-teaching stuff. This time I went into character design. So what I wound up doing was I did the dreaded thing. I used AI. Blah, blah, blah. But before you get mad at me, what I did was nothing is generated. There's no like, just like AI generated stuff. Everything is an edit. These are simply edits of things that were then like expanded upon, right? And so what I did was, as you can see, it takes quite a lot of effort to get things right. So we've got like a lot of stuff going on here. Trying to get everything right. So here's where, this was when I was doing like the monster stuff. Not safe for work. So I had to, some of the kind of like, you know, because I tried to get things that were sort of like reminiscent of like Final Fantasy style artwork. And so sometimes you'll have, you know, something like this, you know, like a succubus or something like that. And so this is an edit of Akashic's succubus. And so don't worry, all the artists are supported here. None of their stuff, you know, making sure that I'm not letting anything, you know, nothing's getting into anybody's training data or anything like that. These are just edits. And so what I wound up doing was, it was actually pretty difficult to get what I was trying to do. And so what I wound up having to do is, so yeah, this is where I was working on Gafgaren's and Sprite. Bunch of the other guys here. I had kind of a little process that I was doing here. Ah, here it is. So simply taking an image and dropping it in and being like, make it pixel art, wasn't really doing anything, nothing useful anyways. And so what I wound up having to do was, I would take an image, and the first thing I would do is I would have it convert it to a very simple prompt. Digital art style. I switched away from hard lighting afterwards. I went to soft lighting. Only if it was a monster that was like kind of weird, like as if like the engine wouldn't understand it or the AI didn't quite get what I was trying to do, I would add something like crawler robot, you know, like something like that. But for the most part, I didn't need to do that. I just needed to say like fantasy creature or something like that, you know? And so what I'd do is I would switch it to digital art style, and oftentimes, if it did it right, you would get something really pretty impressive, actually. It would look like, let's see. Good one here. Yeah, so like this guy, right? So this is from an artist, Thalzon. Let's see if it'll show the image I used. Okay, so that's the original image, right? And I love Thalzon's stuff because he's got, or she, I don't know who they are, but Thalzon has a really creative mind, like Akashic's does too. And so they have a very varied bestiary of monsters. So what you do is you just digital art style, hard lighting, fantasy creature, boom, right? So it comes out like this, almost like a sculpture, even, right? And then what you do is you take that. Yeah, this took a long time to do. There he is. So then I would go, you know, pixel art style, fantasy creature, get a white background on there so I could cut it out, remove the background. But the problem was that was still getting kind of like, I would still get like things like this, right? Where that's like, that's cool looking pixel art, but it's a little too crisp. All I want is to, like, something like this was closer to what I was trying to get at, right? So I kept going on, and then finally I had to research the styles that they used for the pixel art, like what was going on in the older art. And so I was able to get a prompt that really got things closer to what I was looking for, like this right here. So you see, so this was originally, I don't want to spend all day finding that guy, but so you would take the original Akashic's image, feed it through digital art style, hard lighting, it would pop out this guy, right? Then we'd add that to the subject reference, and then we put in our specific type of pixel art thing. This prompt won't work anymore, actually. Already, you need to remove this. Because if you say that, the last time I tried to use this prompt, it started popping back not safe for work rejects. Doesn't really make any sense, but okay. Where was it? Because I used the same prompt for my characters as I started to get into, because I wanted something closer to like that. I didn't want it to be too detailed. I wanted to bring it down a notch. So at some point, yeah, here it is. So I was just trying to make this guy, Merrick, and I got bumped with not safe for work. I had to remove the word Final Fantasy from the thing, right? And you know what? That's fair enough, because I wasn't necessarily trying to rip off Final Fantasy. I wanted, how do I explain this? With art and music and stuff, eventually enough people do the same sort of thing that there's like an unspoken tradition, or like not even necessarily a style, but I would just say that there's like a certain kind of tradition, right? And so I'm trying to keep all my eggs in the same basket, with that basket being this tradition that I see, right, when it comes to this era of games. So that's a big reason. Like that's what came down to engine choice. That's what came down to like how I'm doing these graphics. What came down to like the mechanics I put in. Because like, what's the point of doing a retro game if it's totally modern? That's not very retro, in my opinion, anyways. And so I think it's fair enough to say that maybe with a couple, like if you removed a couple quality of life things, like the ability to save anywhere and stuff like that, if you were to play Neverspring Chronicles and then you were to play like Final Fantasy 4 or Final Fantasy 6 or something like that, or Chrono Trigger's pretty pushed the SNES, like it's got a lot going on, but like, games like that, I think that you would find that the challenge is similar, right? That like it stays true to how games were played back then, with the exception, of course, like I said, for like you couldn't really save anywhere, especially not in a dungeon. But a couple of quality of life things aren't too bad. But anyways, so part of the fun of this though is, like I said, I went back to the learning table and got into like what makes a character, like this stuff you've got to edit, like what makes a good character design. And I already knew some stuff like, your character should convey like personality and maybe a story, like kind of stuff. I was like, okay, yeah, that's, to me anyways, like that seems like kind of self-explanatory, like right on. But there were some things that I knew I was doing wrong, or that I found out I was doing wrong, right? And so one of them, it was talking about like when you go into like colors and stuff like that, like the colors that are coming off, it's like, I had like, all these ornamentations and all this kind of stuff, it was like kind of exotic because I thought it was cool. But in reality, it's like if you're working with too much, there's like too much going on with your character, it's like kind of forgettable. It's just like, it's almost like the focus gets drawn away from, your character stuff, unless it's like, really important to who the character is, right? And so, so I toned down some of like the stuff and made the colors palettes more, unique to the characters as best I could. And another thing that they said was like, say like, here was a lot of things. I even thought about at one point going to a brown-haired Merrick, because a lot of the lore as to why he and Natasha have white hair gets kind of like lost in the cuts that I had to do to finish the game. But I didn't feel like changing all the sprites and stuff, so in the end. But so you may notice also, so Duncargo here, like I had to use, and the I did use some RTP stuff in the original release, but it wasn't because it was like a laziness thing. It's because those characters, they just came out of those RTPs, right? Like the character was already there. It was almost like I was like, oh my god, that's so and so I used that image, right? And so Duncargo was one of them. He was very RTP heavy character, and by RTP I mean like default asset, that like the stuff that came with the engine. And so anybody who's aware of what engine they're playing the game on, then they've probably seen these assets before, and so it's one, to them it probably seems like kind of cheap and like sort of, low effort, even though it's like it wasn't intended like that. But also it's if you've played other games that have those assets, you know what I mean? Like it breaks you out of the immersion because you're like, oh, I remember that guy from this other game, like kind of thing. And so Dunkarga needed a redesign, but still within, like how he would look in the game. And so the reason why I bring him up is his design got modified by overall character cast design. So this is what's kind of fun about using like the generators, right? Is like once you get stuff put together, you can kind of see what they look like in different ways. Like, cool, the sweet action figure line of Neverspring, out now, buy it today. Like, just different stuff that you can check out. Stylish. But so you see, you still get problems here where there's like everything's like kind of like ink watered out. It made up a signature down here, which means it probably grabbed something from somebody's stuff that it wasn't supposed to. We don't want that. So this one, that's why, like, and actually, you know what? So this is a good example of why I did it the way I did it. So when you're telling it to just switch around to similar styles, it starts looking for, the way that the AI works is it'll start looking for similar stuff, right? But when you tell it to do something new, it can't just take like the 2D image and be like, oh, okay, this. When you switch a 2D image to like digital art and then tell it to add lighting, it has to get 3-dimensional information about the character, right? And so what it does is it actually it like almost like how like Star Trek transporter technology works, right? Where like it blows it into a million atoms and then like reassembles it. It kind of has to do that. And so when it does that, one thing it'll do is it'll actually fix some of the imperfections a lot of time because it's having to redo stuff. And then once it has a 3-dimensional idea of what the thing is, it can like infer what other things should be, right? So maybe it'll like fix a messed up hand. But so Dunkarga's design got modified slightly because of the cast of characters. So as I was studying individual character design, and then I was also studying cast of character design, right? Because there's different layers. Like, so if you have multiple characters, you want them to kind of like blend well, right? And so I was watching this one video where the guy made a really good point. He was like, people often forget that there's different body types, when you're making characters. And if you look at my old characters, they were like all the girls were kind of the same, all the guys were kind of the same. They just like, all of the design was kind of like up here in the face part. And so I went back and I looked at what I had, and like their personalities as they come out. Dunkarga was like, he's a fighter, and he's like a nomad. He's just sort of like a vagabond, like drifter, sort of the scruffy heart of gold anti-hero maybe, And so it made sense that he would, and especially being like earth magic and all that kind of stuff, it made sense that Dunkarga would be, strong. And he's also kind of tends to be, if you were to play to every character's strengths, like Dunkarga would probably be like your tank, right? It made sense for him to be a bigger guy. So one of the things the video said was that a good cast of characters should almost be like a roller coaster, because you've got like these different like body styles. And so as I looked more into it, I was kind of like, well, that makes sense to me. And so I had to look at what I got here, right? So we had our Danji Nomad, he came out good. We had Merrick, who's supposed to be like kind of like an average guy for the most part. He's a little like, kind of aloof, sort of does his own thing, kind of. And then we've got Vanessa, who is a dancer class, because if you've played the game, she's an exotic dancer from the city. Like, so these two grew up together, right? And so they know each other, they're friends, they've known each other since childhood and stuff. So these are your two like city dwellers, right? These two city folk here. And then you've got, the Dunkarga, the nomad guy. This is your end party, right? There's other characters, and then you've got Alesidel. So this is how we had Natasha initially here. But she doesn't really there's a thing that goes on too. Like, so they talk about how you communicate story with your character design and stuff like that. And I'm always looking for ways to sort of because I had to cut stuff to stay with the story, I'm always looking for ways to tell more things without having to bog the player down with words. So I'm always looking for a way to kind of like tell more of the story without having to tell the story. And so one good way is to kind of put it in how like the characters dress. So if you were to just look at these guys, what kind of environment do you think they'd come from? Like everybody's wearing like jackets and like overcoats and stuff with the exception of Alecidel. And there's a reason for that also. What's going on here is, so like in the world of Neverspring, you've got this weird kind of climate thing that's going on because of the Phoenix problem and like the cycle that's all messed up and everything, and how there's like this perpetual fall almost throughout the land. And also because this is like a different world, like there's a lot of like I went overboard with some of the lore and stuff, like how like humans body heat differs from elf body heat, and the like different things with the societies and how they do stuff. And so what you'll find is that characters in Neverspring tend to wear like what it was always this thing that struck me about living up north was there was this period of time like as it was getting cold in fall where people up north would dress strangely. Like they would wear a sweatshirt or a hoodie but then shorts and like sandals or something. You know, where it's like, well, are you hot or are you cold? You know, like kind of thing. But in reality, it would regulate the person's body heat just right, that like all of them was a comfortable temperature. Like half wasn't too hot, half wasn't too cold, because that's just the way that, you know, like body heat and stuff works. And so because it's like, you know, sort of like this perpetual fall thing, you'll find that everybody has these kind of like you know, likewise too, even in their shoes, you'll find that like basically if you're stepping off of, you know, out of the city or something like that, there's like puddles, you know, there's the swamp right next to the city. Like everything's very green because all of the like regular trees and stuff have died, but all the evergreen and mosses are still there. And so everything's like very like wet and like kind of cold. It's almost like the day after a rainy day in fall is like what you're looking at up there. And so people dress accordingly. And so that was the problem with Natasha's original design. She was dressed like for summer. And then also one of the things I noticed too, this is what I'll do with like my animes and stuff, is I started to realize I was like, there's something weird about her body or something. And I realized that it was her head size. And so what I'll do sometimes is I'll take the character as I'm making it and like kind of I'll shift it over to realism style to see what they would look like as like a real person. And so if they come out okay, then you're okay, you're on track, right? But if they like sometimes they'll come out with like real big eyes or like a big head or something. And so then you know that your character might be, their proportions might be kind of off. But so this is what she looks like, right? She's got a brown coat, she's got something blue, and then she's got like a white, like almost like a mini skirt. I'm like, okay, so I'm wanting to stay on point here, otherwise I'm going to have to change everything, right? What I wound up doing was I wound up blending the idea that I had with her old design, and we gave her this coat, we gave her her blue, we gave her, and then so she has a skirt, right? But it's not really a skirt. It's like they're like shorts. So this is where like I had so what I did to get this image, what I do is I would take an image like this, and I would go over to Domo AI, and I would create a video. It would calculate everything, and it would very surprisingly render this into a 3D model, like just boom right there, and then make it and then animate it. And so this is where I had put a video out that I think got misunderstood, and so I just kind of like unlisted it. But where I was talking about polyrhythmic congruence and how things are like, if you're into like synchronicity or like, you know, stuff like that, like how things oddly enough tend to kind of line up. And what had sparked that was that I found that if you begin your workflow with a music video, just a clip, right? Like tell it to do anything, just have it in there. And like so that it's in the generative field when shit fires off with your other stuff. But if you put it in there and you put it in and you do it, the music will affect the output of your animations from then on in that session, right? So that was kind of a cool discovery. So a lot of these are actually made with music in the end, as well as art. And so this was an accident. I don't know if this looks familiar to anybody. But as I began developing, and like I said, I was like studying like, color theory, and I was even going as deep as like what anime colors of hair say about the character and all that kind of stuff, and like eye colors and everything. And so when I started to design Alesidel, I started getting stuff like this, where what this is this isn't necessarily a mistake. This is the AI gravitated towards using certain design techniques in mathematics, and I guess it just got kind of caught up in what it was doing, and it wound up these like white bars that are supposed to separate the collage of images. It got kind of like, it basically took this golden ratio sequence and sort of burned it into the image, which tells me that I did something to trigger like something for its mathematics to drift towards closer towards a golden ratio, right? So when I hit this, I decided that I was on a good route for Alesidel's character design, right? So I started to kind of stick with it more. And so the important thing to know about these that I find like really fascinating is that a lot of people forget that the whole thing about the AI is that it's an inference machine, right? It's meant to infer meaning from things. So what I found was that depending on how my character was dressed, depending on the expression on their face, depending on like the shape of their body, what they were wearing, like, right, like if I put a bow on her, like if I took this image and I put it into, let's say, Domo to create an animation, like she would do one thing one way, but if I put a bow in her hair, she would do something a different way. And it was because the model infers personality from her based on the way she looks. Basically, we're talking about something that judges a book by its cover, but like gets real deep into the cover. You know what I mean? And so what'll happen is, and now we're dealing with two things with AI, right? You're dealing with inference and probability, right? And then you take inference and probability, and then you shove all that into possibility. And so with probability, like I don't know, like if you remember me going back to the idea of Merrick having brown hair, the reason I did that was because as I was getting real into like the character design aspect of things, I noticed that the AI generator was having trouble with Merrick's character, and it kept trying to give him brown hair. Right? And so what I did was I did some research into like AI and what it was doing, because I was getting frustrated with why it was doing that. And what I found is that it wasn't that it was so much necessarily a mistake. It's that the AI was trying to kind of tell me, like, are you sure you don't want to do this? Because what is happening is it's inferring all this personality from my character, and then it's checking the probability, right? Like, so it checks like how, like what character design is, what people's characters are, and all this kind of stuff. And what it's finding in its training data is that it's more probable that my character should have brown hair, right? And so that's why I start getting these weird generations where like it's like trying to force my character to have brown hair kind of thing. So what I found was that when I leaned into these seeming like mistakes, that it began to give me kind of better generations. Like it was almost like the blurriness would fade away. Like it was almost like the AI had a better understanding of what I was going for. And so what I do when I use this is I actually look for quote unquote mistakes in the generation as I'm like developing a character. And what I'll do is I'll check them out. You know what I mean? Like if I see one that's kind of weird, like I'll lean into it and I'll check it out. It might not be the AI. It might be that the AI is trying to tell you it's your character, right? If your palette's like off balance, it's going to try to change colors. Like it's actually trying to adapt your work, right? Because the way that these things like help you like realize what you're trying to do is it's not just doing what you say. You're not like just telling it do this thing and it's like, okay, What you're telling it is, I have this idea. I need you to dive into the realm of possibility and bring forth what it could be, right? And so then it's like, all right, well, what could it be? And so it looks at its training data and it's like all this stuff, right? And so then it's like, what's the probability that, okay, so now it like takes these like key factors from it and it's like, what are the probabilities that the hair color is like this or that it's like that, right? But then if your prompts, or then if your character is like, real crazy looking, or the palette's off, like it's not, congruent with like art styles or art rules or whatever you want to call them, it'll try to sort of push you closer towards fulfilling these probabilities, right? So what I would do is I would lean into that and see what I could get out of it. And so the end result was actually pretty cool. You got to generate like tons of different face stuff, and then you got to go through and just kind of get the ones that are useful, manually edit what you can. And old Gobsworth, gob. So we finally got done cargo set up. We got Natasha set up. We got the Impa. We got Kath Garen, guy. Did a lot of work on Vanessa. Finally got Lesidel set up. That one's okay. So what I would do is like I said, so I would take my character and I'd take him into Domo, right? Turn it into a video. And then I'll find a frame that works well, right? Like maybe that one. I want to make sure like his eyes aren't all weird, right? So like maybe like something like that. And then I extract that frame and then maybe I'll use that picture, right? So here's a good one, yeah. So this is a frame I extracted from one. Then I got to clean up the edges and all that kind of stuff. But then one of the real big benefits of doing it this way is that all right, so I was having a lot of trouble getting like dynamic poses and stuff like that out of just open art. And so boom. So what I would do is I would take something like this, right? And like I said, because it's if you trust, here's what I do with my prompts, right? I actually trust the AI to know what it's doing. And I give it room to be creative in my prompts. Because there's this weird phenomenon where if you're too strict on it, like if your prompt is too specific or whatever, the AI starts to kind of mess up. And it won't do it properly. So what I do is I have kind of a more chaotic workflow where I create a lot of stuff. And then I take the time to go through and find what I need in it, right? So I like fill up a toy box and then I dig in. And so what I'll do is, one of the really good things about doing that and kind of letting AI like do its thing is that it starts to infer personality from my characters, right? So like, I only had to do this once with him, and I got a lot of great poses out of it that were like definitely this guy's like character, right? So like just by watching the video, there's nothing like, it's like, well, what's he even doing? But then I can like take frames, right? Maybe get different facial expressions and stuff. So here's where I think this is the one I got that one frame from, but no. So another really useful thing about this, there's where I got it from. Another really useful thing about doing it this way is that I was having like real hard time with weapons. Right? So I get that. Domo did it better than OpenAI. And then I grab a frame, right? And then I take that and I like run it through a pixelator or something like that. And then I got to clean it up. So see, these are some of the backgrounds here. I needed a new bridge background bad. So I got that one going. So that's like the best I could get access in open art, and like I didn't care for that. I was like, So here's where we get into. So then, this was also a really good tip. Like, believe it or not, I just never did this. But they were talking about how, like, when you're designing your characters, to get them all in a lineup. Like, you know, because especially as I'm like, you know, like drawing stuff because image sizes are so big, they were all coming out as like the same height and stuff. So what I wound up doing was putting them all in a lineup here and getting their heights and body sizes correct against one another and seeing what like my cast of characters looks like as, you know, the cast of characters.